Now we're going to discuss setting up multiple entities. So first we're going to navigate over to Company, Setup, Entities. And you should have already created your legal entities in Intacct in this list already. So make sure you've done that. If you have not, watch the entity setup video. Over here, you're going to go to Company, Admin, Subscriptions, and we're going to go down to Multi-Entity, and we're going to configure the multi-entity management area. So first thing we want to make sure you have the issue separate 1099 per entity box on. If you are a company that enters in your transactions at the entity level, then you need to have these two check boxes turned on. If you enter transactions at the top level, do not check this box. You will not check any of these boxes here. Okay, this restrict access to top level is too restrictive. Restrict access by location, group, department group. You want to make sure you have these turned on just in case you would want to do that. It doesn't mean that you're going to, but it gives you the option to. So make sure those are all checked. Enable affiliate entity dimension. You are not going to check that unless you have bought the consolidation subscription. And that is a separate series, so we're not going to cover that here. Interentity account mapping plan. So this is going to be your due to, due from accounts and how they relate in each entity. So the basic mapping plan is something we do not suggest using. That allows for one due to, due from per entity. So it's a net receivable or net payable. The advanced one allows you to have a separate due to, a separate due from for each entity. So you can kind of see the layout here. So I'm going to go into that next, but we do not suggest ever using the basic mapping plan. Once you set it, you are stuck. So if you decide to start with basic, still pick advanced here. We're just going to put the due to, due from in the interentity receivable and interentity payable spot. Okay. Enable interentity transactions. This is going to be your automation to create your interentity transactions automatically using the Sage Intacct functionality. So an AP bill, for example, you might split between two different entities. This will create the automatic due to, due from in the AP bill screen, for example. Okay, there's other areas it does that in as well. So if you have this checked, it's going to do that automation between the entities, the due to, due from. It's going to do it at the entity level. Best practice is to balance by entity. Hardly ever are you going to manually balance by locational level because of the fact that when you balance by auto balance by entity, the balancing by entity includes all the journal entries for the entity along with the locations with that entity. So you want to make sure you've got that automation turned on. So more than likely, you will have this automation turned on. If, however, you are going to manually balance your subledger transactions, notice that I no longer have the capability to automate any sort of interentity transaction balancing. So when you manually balance all your subledgers, Intacct does not track the interentity payables and receivables. So even though one entity can still pay a bill on behalf of another entity, Intacct will not track the interentity due to, due from, and create those offsetting journal entries. One thing you can do, however, a different mixture, is you can create interentity due to, due from automatically and manually balance your subledger credits. So those would be credits, adjustments, and advances. So that is an option. However, you cannot do this and have the auto interentity transaction capability up here. Okay, so we're going to set it to automatically create entries, eliminate at the entity, also includes location, entity level, and we're going to leave these manual checkboxes off. And we're going to show the workflow, how it works in this typical scenario. Okay, the limit AP credits and limit AR credits to entity owners. That just means if there's an AP credit created in a specific entity, you cannot use it in another entity. That's the simplest way to explain it. Same with AR here. And then if you have the enable inter-entity auto balancing turned on, you're going to pick inter-entity journal here. Okay, then we're going to hit save. Okay, so now we're going to navigate to set up your do to do from mapping. So we're going to go to company, setup, inter-entity account mapping. And I have an example one started here. However, I want to point out some things that you can do in this mapping. Okay, so the first two boxes here are the relationships. So it's between development and GC. So entity A, inter-entity receivable, entity A, inter-entity payable. So I have a simple setup here where I'm using account 12200 for entity A and 12200 for entity B. For the inter-entity payable, I've got the same account as well, 22200 for both. Okay, but I also could do something more specific and say, I want my inter-entity receivable here to be due from Timberline GC, and I want my due to be due to Timberline GC, and over here I've got my due from development company, and due to development company. Okay, so you can get specific, you can make the accounts the same. You could also even do something where, let's say you want the due to / from to be in one account. So you're going to record payables and receivables through here. So you could just do 12200 across the board if you prefer. Okay, so it allows you for more specific, detailed inter-entity account mapping, or you can make it more basic. Okay, if you start with basic and then you decide to go more detailed, you cannot flip to advanced. That's why we just tell everybody to stay here and turn it to basic like this. Okay, because we've had too many people start with basic and then want to get more specific, and you can't do that. Okay, when you're balancing, you might want to look at these accounts and split them up if you have a lot of transactions going on. So that's one of the reasons to be more specific. Okay, so I'm going to keep it more specific here, so you can kind of see how the screens work when it creates the journal entries when we're going through the workflow. One more thing you might decide to set up when you have a multi-entity environment is something called inter-entity billback. So I'm going to navigate to accounts receivable setup configuration. I'm going to point you to where that is. Inter-entity billback is a way to have my accounts receivable invoice be generated. Say I'm charging rent to my general construction entity from my development entity, and I want to charge that rent and create an AR invoice, and I want the system to automatically create the accounts payable bill to the other entity. The system will automatically do that with what's called an inter-entity billback. So you just have to enable it in accounts receivable, hit save, and then now we can navigate over to the entities and set up the customer and the vendor for the entities that have inter-entity billback. So I'm going to go to my Timberline General Construction, and now I have this new tab called Additional Information. Since I've turned inter-entity billback on, that tab now appears. So now I need to set up a vendor, and I'm going to call it something like TimGC inter-entity vendor. And then I'm going to do a customer called TimGC Enter Entity Customer. We're going to do the same on the development one. Okay, so now we've got our inter-entity customers and vendors set up on the two entities that we'll do transactions from. And then last but not least, I just want to point out that you will want to create an elimination entity if you have not bought the consolidation subscription. So you're going to set up the elimination entity. Best practice is to put some sort of Z or a character at the front, because the IDs are going to order in alphabetical order on financial reports. So we like to put a little Z in front of it and just call it elim. So ZLM, elimination entity. You have to put a tax ID number in, so just use 9s. And enable is the elimination entity. Okay. So this is if you have not bought the consolidation subscription and you want to do the consolidation manually. Okay. So this is going to be shown in the multi-entity workflow videos on how to eliminate and run manual consolidation on your own. Okay. So that elimination entity is required. Okay. So that is the setup for multi-entity. Go ahead and watch the multi-entity workflow to learn how to use what has been set up here for inter-entity billback, inter-entity transactions and those automations, and the manual do to, do from eliminations when you run consolidating or consolidated financial reports.